Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
80 Bosman.
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
Ooh. We're your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
I am Termite, and I'm struggling to get this open. A weekly video game podcast where we smash together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight we are talking about the elongation, hence the long, elongated, intro there, of the development cycle. So why are development cycles getting longer and longer and longer? So we'll talk a little bit about what the development cycle is and talk about the great elongation, as I call it. And so we'll talk more about that later, but we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a Bold Rock hard cider because Bold Rock is made in my backyard out here in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yup.
Fun fact, I didn't realize that Bold Rock, as popular as it is only 10 years old. They started in 2012. That's 3 years after I was married. And I thought I was having cookouts like around that time that I was like, I got married in 2009. So like, I thought I was having cookouts around then and saw Bold Rock forever. Like they've always been a part of my memory. So interestingly enough,
were they like rebranded by any chance? I don't know. Cause interesting. I don't know. I mean, if I thought back, I'm like, yeah, I guess Angry Orchard kind of was the go-to cider for a while, and then Bold Rock. I mean, Bold Rock's not a go-to for me, but like, yeah, whatever.
It should be. It's delicious.
It's interesting. It's good. It's good. It's definitely good.
I'm drinking their IPA dry hop cider because being such an obsession with IPAs, I loved the hopped mixed with the apple. It's great. That's what it tastes like.
I've had it
cider
before,
with
and it's exactly what it tasted like to me. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm having another. I think I had this a couple weeks ago, but from the listener's perspective. But I'm having my Gumball Head Three Floyd's Gumball Head. Sorry, American Wheat Pale Ale. So I talked about it then. I'll talk about it again now, though. It's good. It's got enough. It's got enough hops where if you like hops, you'd probably be pleased. But for someone who's like ambivalent towards them, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can taste hops, but they're not like, it's not too much. It's not trying to be it's a pale ale, but it's not trying to be an India pale ale. It's just a and so therefore it tastes more like a wheat. So it's got a nice little sweet. It's very smooth, very, very delicious, very good summer beer. But you'll notice I'm wearing my hoodie because we were gone for the weekend. We just got back today, so our house was a little bit warm, so we turned the AC on and just cranked it like a degree lower than normal, and so now it's like pumping. It's like and I'm like, oh, I'm so cold.
It's the best.
Yeah, it is the best. It is like, it's a violation of nature, right? Like, you're supposed to be hot in the summer as humans, and what we've done is we've created air conditioning and said, screw you, nature. And so I just like to air conditioning, especially cold air conditioning, and wearing hoodies in the winter is like a big middle finger to Mother Nature, and screw that. I'm kidding. She's love Mother Nature. She's wonderful. She doesn't exist.
But
it's
I hate heat, fairy. And I love air conditioning, and I wish it was 58 degrees in my house at all times, but I don't have the air conditioning system with which to handle that when it's 100 degrees. Like, I don't know what it would take, like an industrial refrigerator to get my house down to 58 when it's 100 degrees outside.
Not yet been 100, like over 100 in Virginia this summer. Yeah. I'm not sitting here saying that I love the temperature it's been, but we've so far avoided, knock on wood, those like heat waves you typically get that just push things. It's like, it's humid, so it's bad enough here in the summer. So anyways.
Humid.
We can talk about I want to talk about something real quick. I had sort of mentioned this to you, but I feel like it's worth bringing up on the podcast. As longtime listeners will be aware of, I went through a whole journey last year to get a subscription for Adderall to treat my ADHD that everyone but me knew that I had. And finally, so I finally got that. Anyways, for the first time since getting on Adderall, though, I forgot it and was gone for like 3 days. And so the first day obviously was fine because I still had it in my system. But then like day 2 is normally fine. I've had a day off of Adderall before, tired and lethargic. But by day 3, I was sitting there like, okay, I feel like crap. It wasn't like feeling sick, and it wasn't like cravings like nicotine. People report like nicotine, oh, I just want to smoke, or alcohol withdrawals, oh, I just want to eat a drink. No, this was just literally like feeling like my brain was slow and that I was tired. And so I would take a nap and that wouldn't help. I would drink coffee, that wouldn't help. I would tack on a Mountain Dew Baja Blast that my dad had gotten from Food Lion or whatever. I tack one of those on there, wouldn't help. Nothing would make me feel like I was not tired and slow. So that was a new experience for me, and I we looked it up, and that's a symptom of ADHD withdrawal. The good news is I was able to get it in my system today, but had I not, in like I think day 9 or 10, you start experiencing like paranoia, and there's other
Really?
like paranoia and like body aches, and it's crazy. I mean, and it makes sense though. It's amphetamine. It's like low grade methamphetamine, or it's legal methamphetamine, right? That's really the only difference between.
So does it
Adderall.
make you crave sugar?
No,
when you're on it?
Okay. No, it's low grade. Like it's not as intense as meth, but it does have the like teeth. It does the same thing to your mouth that meth does, that like makes the teeth bad. Like it's a double whammy. You like grind your teeth more if you already like predisposed to that, and it dries your mouth out, so that increases the likelihood of getting like bacteria and cavity like growth. So yeah, this is a reminder. This is an amphetamine. So
I heard from a dentist who lives in our neighborhood, like straight up doctorate in dentistry, like dentist who had a practice, who did dentistry for a lifelong
in dentistry.
Like legit. This is not a student. This is not a side gig. Like straight up, like normal. He's filled
never
more
go to someone who
than...
describes their dentist practice as a side gig.
Right? Yeah. He's not an actual dentist anymore. He's moved on to a higher level.
Okay.
Like he's doing some other thing about like releasing jaws. There's
interesting.
A condition where people have like lockjaw and like lifelong pain, where they go from dentist to dentist to dentist who can't get help. Anyway, and aside, he mentioned one day the reason why people who are addicted to meth have their teeth fall out are the reasons you have that you just talked about: dry mouth, grinding teeth. But it's all exacerbated by a very strong desire for sugar. And so, like, apparently it just drives their sugar cravings through the roof, and they just devour candy in addition to those things you mentioned. And it's just like all bad for you.
I mean, and my dosage is very highly controlled too, right? Like we started small, worked our way up. Like if someone's taking meth, they're not paying attention to dosages at all, other than like, this makes me feel good.
Right.
So I would imagine that may be a feature of it, but I have not taken a dose high enough to do that. But definitely the withdrawal symptoms, I'd never experienced that before. I've gone through caffeine withdrawal, but that's easy, right? Like, but I've never really had a drug like this that I've been on. Like, oh yeah, okay, that's a withdrawal symptom. So freaking crazy. Cool. Anything else you wanted to chat about? That was my thing. That was what I brought to the table.
I can do a little bit of a what do you learn, because I just acquired 3 platinums in preparation for my trip in July. My goal for the year is 2 platinums a month, and I'm now on point at the beginning of July here when we're recording this, before I leave to go on a very long work trip. I earned the platinum trophies in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, which was absolutely incredible. I had a blast.
I think you talked about this last week, but I'll let you continue.
I talked about playing it, but not platinuming it. So I'm going to move on. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But Sonic Origins dropped, which is the collection of Sonic 1, 2, Sonic CD, Sonic 3, and Knuckles, like redone in the modern engine that Sonic Mania was built off of. Amazing. I know there's a lot of controversy out there about the music, and like if you go to Digital Foundry's channel on YouTube, he'll point out all of like the little bugs and nuance problems.
Right.
I, despite those, thoroughly enjoyed my time. And I did not know, because it's been so long. When I fired up Sonic 3, the music, the feel, the memory of those games is seared into my brain, that it hit a comfort gaming feel that I didn't expect to be like twinged, for lack of a better word. And I was living my best life playing through Sonic 3. I had the levels memorized. I was blowing through the game. I was having a blast. Nothing was challenging or hard. I was digging the music, except for the 3 stages that don't have the right music. It was amazing. Played through all 4 games. They're way shorter than I remember. Like, I guess as kids, like, games just felt like, because you didn't get them as often, or like for us, we rented games a lot. So when we rented one or bought one, it was like that's what we were stuck with for so long. Just like made do with. So we replayed them a lot. I don't know, but all 4 games, I blew through it pretty quickly. We got the platinum in Sonic Origins, and it was a blast. I had it awesome. And then the very first game with the PlayStation Plus Premium, Sony transitioned from their PlayStation Plus subscription to a 3-tiered system, and you get access to more games if you upgrade to a higher tier. So in that library of games is a wonderful indie game called The Artful Escape that hit Game Pass months ago, like last year, and I loved starting it, but I couldn't commit to it because I wasn't getting trophies. So when I saw it was on PlayStation, I was like, yes! And it is this like indie darling game of you following an individual who is the descendant of a legendary folk music singer who is going to put on a show for his local town, like a local mountain town. And he is supposed to be a folk singer as well, but doesn't feel like he should be a folk singer and wants to be like a rock god. And so he wants to go out and do like electronic guitar solos, like mealy, 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 mealy. And it's totally opposite of folk. And so you have to live with this character as he goes through like what he feels like has been handed to him, the identity he feels like he has to portray versus who he is in reality. And it's awesome. It's really deep, surprisingly, like how quick it is. It's also super sci-fi and way out there. I highly recommend it. Great game. So 3 platinums.
Wow.
Ready to rock. I'm caught up. So it's 14 for the year. It is July. Man. So
I think since last time we recorded, which would have been a week ago, but like the listeners a few weeks ago, I think the last time I played anything was I got like one night this week where I played some Outer Wilds and a little bit of Ghostwire Tokyo, working on that platinum. That's going to take a while for me to like check off all the boxes. Yeah. But Outer Wild, the game I'm playing like for fun right now, and it's fun. But again, that I talked about that last week. This I will say though, 2 games that I've gotten, I think I talked about how I got Disco Elysium for my birthday, which I'm excited about. That's gonna be like a 60-hour platinum, so I'm not like in a rush to necessarily platinum it. I might start it and then get as far as like beat it or whatever, and then platinum it later. But in addition to that, I recently finally picked up. I've been dragging my feet on this. I finally picked up on Steam since it was the summer sale this week. Got 10% off, and I had some like card sales money.
Oh yeah,
I did the thing where you'd sell the trading cards, get a little bit of money in your bank. So couple that with the savings and I got a $20 game for $15, and I grabbed V Rising finally because I've heard all the rage about that game. Our friend Matt asked us if we had, that's fired it up. From. It's like a survival. It's like a Diablo meets like an exploration game meets a survival game, but with vampires. So the survival aspect is like you build your vampire fortress. So sounds cool. Got a couple of people interested in playing it with me that haven't started it yet. That are like, I talked to them about it. Like, hey, I might grab this, and they're like, oh, if you do, let me know. So I'm looking forward to firing it up. It's the time of year to try something like that, right? Like since
no big releases,
exactly. So, but since then though, I have had a bunch of games fall on my radar. It's coming out this fall. Might not be as bad as it looks. You got 2 Souls-likes that are coming out that are not from software, obviously, but like there's Timesia, which is an indie game, and then there's which is supposed to be like Bloodborne, and then there's Steel Rising, which is made by Spiders, who made Greedfall. So Spiders is trying to do what they did with Greedfall, where they kind of like made a BioWare RPG that was beloved in the form of Greedfall. They're kind of trying to do that with From Software here, but it looks cool. It's like takes place during the French Revolution, but like if the French Revolution were full of like clockwork automaton robots, and so it's got like this sort of steampunk vibe, and you are a clockwork like dancing robot that's been retrofitted for combat. And so it looks interesting, very interesting look. Both of these games are supposed to be very like Bloodborne inspired, so probably be very linear, not like Elden Ring at all, but they might scratch that Soulsborne itch. And those are both coming out this fall. And then of course with Crisis Core, and supposedly the leaks and the rumors are that God of War was supposed to be announced for November 11th, and that was supposed to happen last week, but the Roe vs. Wade stuff, they decided to delay that because they didn't want to try to like it sounds silly, but like compete with that, like that. What the point being is they're like, we want to like give people like it's just not a good time to announce it, right? Like something like that's not a good time to announce.
So
right. So there's with those 2 games coming out, they might Crisis Core and God of War, and then not to mention Callisto Protocol looks really interesting to me as well. it looks like this fall 2022 might kind of redeem itself, pull itself together.
So Callisto Protocol is December for those audience members who are like, oh my gosh, all this stuff's coming out at once. Callisto Protocol is December. God of War potentially is November, which would compete with only Pokemon Scarlet Violet at the moment, as far as we know, and that's it. And then if you go back, what was the other? You mentioned another game.
Oh yeah, see, Thymesia, and it's like it looks like Thymesia is what the THY. Easy, yeah, and then there's Steel Rising, so those two would come out in September. There's two games that like look good, but again, it would all of these except for God of War are like reviews. God of War and maybe Crisis Core are like wait for reviews, but there's two other games there's one called Evil West and one called Solstice that both look interesting to me as well. But again, those are like very, very like review scores. So Solstice kind of looks like a very story driven, like it's got the same like graphical style as like the Darksiders games, where it's kind of cartoony, kind of blocky, a little bit of that WoW look, but it looks like a third person action game. So I'm interested in it. But so again, there's a lot of interesting possibilities, but like all of them could suck or all of them could be great. And we're back there. Like we're back at that same stage as we were. So other than God of War and Crisis Core,
Thymesia is August 9th.
Yeah,
so that's August,
okay, that's
which
right.
is
that's
late
August.
summer. Yeah, there is Lord of the Rings Gollum, which is definitely please wait.
I've heard.
Wait. Do not get excited about Gollum.
Early impressions were pretty bad. Yeah,
rough. And something I am extraordinarily excited about, and will take up hopefully the entire month of September, is The Last of Us Part 1 remake.
Right.
So that's going to be like, I'm taking off work. I will
probably get it, but I also
I already have it pre-ordered. I'm in.
I mean, I would love to revisit that game and play it again. Absolutely, I would love to play that game with my wife watching. Frankly, but or have her play it even better. But I don't know. I'm just like, there's enough coming out around that time that like I'd be willing to wait on that until a sale or something. I do, of course, I'm looking forward to Forspoken. Hopefully, like crossing my fingers on that as well.
October 11th. Yep.
So yeah, and then that's Gotham Knights. We'll see as well.
Midnight
Starfield
Suns.
Also.
If you're interested, October. Starfield was delayed till next year.
Oh, was it? Oh, it was. Okay, all right. My bad.
Yeah.
So cool.
Midnight Suns is October 7th. If you're worried about that, from the XCOM developer Fire Access, and then Forspoken October 11th. The sequel to A Plague Tale is October 18th. So
right.
I mean, there's a pretty solid like
want to
fall.
blast Plague Tale out. Yeah, I did want to blast
Scorn,
Plague Tale
you mentioned
out.
Scorn is October 21st.
Scorn?
Gotham Knights is October 25th. Did you mention Scorn?
Did
you not?
Scorn. No, you might be thinking of Solstice, and there's Evil
right.
West. I think Evil West is the other one I was mentioning.
Okay,
that one like showed during one of the events. They're both the same. I think September 20th. But anyways, we'll talk more about. We can talk more about that. Video games go where like 18 minutes in. Sure. It's cool. Good to kind of like look ahead because I kind of realized that it was, but I think we should move on because we're like 18 minutes in. So
let's do it. Yeah.
Video games coming out, video games that we're playing, and Adderall is our not being an Adderall withdrawals anymore is our favorite thing, but
80-bit pod smash is our favorite thing.
80-bit pod smash is our favorite thing. Favorite things. I say that since we talked a little bit about what's coming out, I don't really have a DLC planned. So let's do favorite things and we'll jump into our topic. And that way we can kind of smooth out that gap there. Sorry, DLC fans. Sure. Sometimes it just makes sense to do
one or the other, skip over the other
we'll do it
thing
next week.
And do what we got to do.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll do it next week. I do want to talk about favorite things though, so I'll go first. Did I talk already about my Hellfire Club shirt?
Yes.
Did I do that last week? I did? Okay.
Because I texted the gifter, Ryan, as you were talking about it, how in love with him you are.
I am.
Not the shirt. Okay, so how in love with him you are. Yeah. Anyway,
I very much am. As much as a man who is heterosexual can be in love with another man who is heterosexual, I am in love with that man.
Unnecessary clarification, but okay.
All right. My favorite thing then is, so this one hasn't come yet, but it's gonna arrive while you're gone. So I guess you've always seen me wear this hoodie, right? Like this is often a hoodie I wear, and it's because it looks like the armor from King Peter and makes me feel like a king while I'm wearing it. Well, I liked it so much, but I wanted some variety, especially for next winter when I'm going to be wearing these things constantly. But it's really comfortable. But I wanted some variety, so I put a bunch of other ones on my wish list. Now, it hasn't arrived yet, but my sister, the same one who got me this one, decided to get me another one off my wish list. And so she's like, so your present's not arriving till like mid-July, but I figured I'd go ahead and tell you anyway since it's your birthday. I was like, yeah, which one did you get? And she's like, I don't know. It's one with like a sun on the front. I went, praise the sun. It's Solaire's armor from Dark Souls. That's one I put on there. I put a bunch on there that were nerdy. Like I put Link's tunic on there. I think it was the one specifically from Twilight Princess. So I put that one on there.
That's good. Yeah.
I put the Mandalorian's armor. Like there's one that looks like the Mandalorian's armor. So I put that on there. So there's a whole bunch. There was a whole bunch she could have gotten, but she got Solaire's, and I'm so pleased. I can't wait. I'm so excited to wear, and just like, especially like wear it out and about, and then have people like do praise the sun to me, and I'll praise the sun back to them, and no other words need to be exchanged. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, it's not one that I have in my hands, but it was kind of like in the same. I wanted to make sure I talked about the Hellfire Club because I was like, just adored that and have been wearing it as much as I can, and probably won't ever wash it. And the same will probably happen with Solaire as well. Yeah. So I'll probably wash that one because I've washed this successfully, no problems. But
nice.
All right, cool. That's my favorite thing then. I've got another one for the fact that we have to record another double up episode.
Yeah. Crap. So. I had two as well. One of them was The Artful Escape, but I talked about that already. And so I'm going to go with Stranger Things season 4. And you talked briefly about that. It might be your next week's favorite thing. But
it's not, but it's okay.
Okay. Volume 2 just dropped, and there's only 2 episodes. The first one's an hour and a half. The last and finale is 2.5 hours long, which is insane.
I have to ask you, have you run up a hill to make a deal with God since?
I did.
Finishing. Okay, good.
Lots of them.
Good.
Yeah.
Me too. I've run up many hills and made deals with gods.
I love it. I am all for Stranger Things.
It's good.
I'm just going to keep it all spoiled. I just want to talk about how amazing it is, and no spoilers here. Do what you got to do, people who are listening to the show. But that's my absolute favorite thing for this. That we thoroughly enjoyed.
It was good.
Season 4 was a
some
step
complaints, and I generally I genuinely thought this was supposed to be the last season, and then
I thought so too. But it's not.
They had talked about it for the longest time as being a 4-season show, and then obviously it's clear what happened is they were planning to do 4 seasons. Then Netflix strong armed them because Netflix is like, we're losing subscriptions. We can't have you end our flagship show. It's seriously their best thing right now. Yeah. Umbrella Academy is pretty good as well, but Stranger Things is just a step beyond. And I know some people have their complaints about the show, but I thought they really brought it for season 4, and I can't wait to see what they do with season 5, despite the fact that it's clear that they're going to continue to just be dragging it out, right? Contriving stuff. So, but yeah, good stuff. Sweet.
Yeah, it's hard to distinguish what was actually planned from season 1 through the end, which the Duffer,
right.
is that Duffer Brothers? Is that their name?
Yeah, Duffer Brothers.
They claimed in interviews recently that they have a vision for what encases the whole story arc across the seasons.
Yep.
But you can also pick out when you're watching all 4 of them where they're didn't expect the seasons to last this long.
We gotta keep going.
We gotta.
Well, no, that's crazy
it's not
because
retconning, but it's definitely
Well, their original plan, their original plan, they said, was to do an anthology series. So they weren't even planning to do this, follow these characters for this long originally. Yeah. Now, granted, I can see them having put together a more long-term plan after it was so successful, and I'm fine with that, right? But originally it was supposed to be just a bunch of weird, an anthology, a bunch of weird happenings in Hawkins related probably to the Upside Down and the lab and all that. But they had everyone loved those kids so much that they and which again they struck gold. So.
They did.
So we'll see.
I feel I just have to articulate something that I like about it, or something that, because I can't just be this is amazing and move on. But I loved it was more horror focused in season 4 than it had been since season 2 and 3.
I agree with that.
I loved the continuity of the origin of everything, answered a lot of questions, and tied all 4 seasons together. So those are the 2 things, spoiler free, that I enjoyed about season 4 versus
they introduced a character in season 4 as well that was my spirit, right?
He's you. And as he was doing things, I'm laughing with my wife that's Dan. Dan. He would say or do something and move on. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It was so good. It was so good. That character is great. And
he's also a DM. So
much more with music this season. Not more with music, but they did really good things with music. Not just the Kate Bush song that I was referencing, but also the the Master of Puppets, the Metallica song as well.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. Oh, it's awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Awesome.
reminding me why that was my favorite thing.
So good.
Oh,
all right.
So good. Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, that's favorite things. So we're skipping DLC, which is normally introduced by a meow, but now we're gonna just do a really sad one. Because we're
There's supposed to be a riff on rap horns. So what used to be like
sad rap
nothing.
horns,
It's
just
a
sad,
sizzle.
deflated.
Yeah.
But it's okay because we're gonna spend time talking about. We'll spend a short time talking about long development cycles right now. Anyways, we'll start. What's a development cycle, and why are they getting longer?
There's video games going from ideas of just like, here's something on someone's desk, which is like pre-production, through the entire cycles of production, and then pre-production, and then development, and then post-production, and then marketing and release. Like there's a whole, and I'm ignorant to most of the details of these things, but the development cycle, as far as I'm concerned, is like after a game has been greenlit and funded by a publisher, it is the time with which it takes to actually make the game. So that's the art assets, the animations, the voice acting.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about
game, level building and design, like those.
And we talked a little bit about like how they're made a few episodes ago. We talked about like video game development, like what are the stages. So we kind of have talked about the stages of the development cycle, but like zooming out and looking at the whole thing, you get this picture of like, you see it again, you talk about it in relation specifically to either a franchise or a developer, right? Like a high profile developer. And it's sort of the idea of like a game's just about to come out and everybody is focused on getting that game out. The entire like effort of the entire studio is like oriented around like that last push. Why am I starting there? That's because like once that is sort of the end of a development cycle, then it's sort of like, oh, now we begin the next big project. Now, that project might already be underway, right? Like they may already have worked on pre-production, blah, 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 blah. But it's sort of like now they're orienting back their resources towards actually building that thing. Mm-hmm. And I imagine there are entire teams that only ever work on the thing that's about to come out versus like, you know, they only get engaged after the last thing they did in a certain part of
there's
the
a lot of work
cycle.
That happens in parallel and it's all staggered. So there's always something in pre-production. There's always something in planning. There's always something in planning. There's something always in pre-production. There's always something in development. There's always something being released. And across those four different like big humps, there's teams that are dedicated to those four different avenues. And so there's a lot of like stacking.
Absolutely.
So, like,
and then there's also these things can either be separated into developers or franchises, right? Because you may have a developer that's big enough that they have multiple teams working on multiple franchises, like think Nintendo, right? Like there's the Zelda team and the Mario team and the Metroid team, like and those teams, but it's like, you know, they end one project, they start the work on the next. But then there's like spin-off projects too. So it's hard to completely like nail down what this is, but we're going to try to talk about it, and more importantly, we're going to try to talk, you know, answer the sort of idea of like, is it just me or is the cycle getting longer in the last 10 years, right? Like, so let's first sort of address that. Is it actually getting longer? I think that yes, it absolutely has. So we'll talk about some examples, but really quick, before we talk about examples, I do want to take a caveat to ask the question, what specifically is development hell, and why is it sort of exceptional in this topic, right? Like, why are we're not going to be spending a lot of time talking about development hell, but I wanted to sort of like address that elephant in the room, because there are, you know, people might sort of say, well, why didn't you talk about this? And if the answer is, well, that franchise got stuck in development hell, and that's sort of different. Development hell is like, you know, we're talking about the fact that development cycles are getting longer on active franchises or active developers that are like, they're like, nothing is delayed, nothing is stuck. There's no problems. It's just
a healthy development cycle, a healthy development studio.
Exactly. Right. Development hell is when it's gotten like interrupted. Either like funding's been pulled, or the idea is stuck. They can't get it like working the way, like literally working. They can't figure out what they want to do with it, or they've been assigned or tasked by their publisher different projects, and then they just never get around to being put back on that project. So something might be announced and then never released because it's stuck in quote unquote development hell. And that can happen for a lot of reasons, but that's not what we're talking about tonight, though it is something that happens and delays these things. I think of like, well, one of the franchises I mentioned here, right? The Diablo franchise, like I believe Diablo 3 was stuck in development hell for a long time. And I think also Diablo 4 similarly got stuck in development hell, but was continued with active development. There was some turnover, but like, so it's kind of exceptional. It's not quite the same thing, but I know that like Warcraft 3 was another one that got stuck in development hell. They restarted it. Metroid Prime 4 is possibly in development hell right now. We don't know. It's in that state where it's like, is it? Is it not? Nintendo keeps saying it's not.
Yeah.
But there are some notable games that like did, right? Like
Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Got canceled too. Right. Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I think of games that also never came out because of development hell, right? StarCraft Ghost got stuck in development hell, and all their prototypes. Go back
and check out our previous episode about those.
Right, we talked about it. Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So cool.
It's
awesome.
interesting. So yeah, whenever you see like a giant studio be ripped off of the production of a game and put onto a different one, you know something crazy's happening. And Retro Studios, who did Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, was not slated to do Metroid Prime 4. So there's years of development that are like what was Retro Studios working on while Metroid Prime 4 was being developed. And then we had news that Metroid Prime 4 was being completely started over and handed to Retro Studios, which is exciting for us because they did the first 3. So let give them the fourth one. But so that's a prime example of a headline anyone in the audience listening to our show could like read and say, oh, something crazy's happening. Mm-hmm. Final Fantasy VII Remake did the same thing. Square Enix canned I think CyberConnect 2, which is a studio that makes a bunch of stuff, and brought the development in-house to Square Enix. Game came out, though, so... Anyway.
As a complete unrelated side note, but there was a while that people thought Bayonetta 3 was stuck in development hell. And it's not. It's out. It's coming out. And as a side note, that also is supposed to come out this year, and so it hasn't been delayed yet. But also has not been given a release date yet.
Yeah. It's like,
So it's another one that's a toss-up for me of like, oh, it's going to be 100% will buy, but also may still get delayed till next year.
Yeah.
I hope not, because that game looks so good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So development cycles being longer. It's not development hell.
Yes.
So where are we now?
Exactly.
So is it just you, or is the cycle getting longer in the last 10 years? Yes. The answer is yes to that. You are correct. And I brought up...
It's just me?
No, it's not just you.
Yes,
okay, I was reading your question that you had in the show notes. So
cool. Let's do real quick before we potentially talk about why. That's like the next question. Do you want to talk about some examples of franchises?
So I was going to bring up exactly what I was doing.
Perfect.
That's right where I was
awesome.
headed. Yeah,
just want to make sure.
So your hunch is correct. In the last 10 years, like development cycles have been longer. And here is ScreenRant.com, which is maybe a hit or miss.
Sure. This is one that takes a lot of research. You could just like Google these titles, when do they come out, and do this research. It's really not like an in-depth study here. So
exactly.
I'll take it.
So of the top 10 games that have the longest development cycles, Spore. Remember Spore from Maxis?
Yeah.
The creator of SimCity. That was an 8-year development cycle. Two Human, which landed on the 360, was initially supposed to be a PlayStation game in 1999, took 9 years to develop, and it ended up being a flop. The Last Guardian, the sequel to Shadows of the Colossus, if you remember, took 9 years to develop. Team Fortress 2 from Valve took 9 years to develop. Final Fantasy 15, 10 years to develop.
Wow.
Prey, that re-release in 2017, took 11 years to develop. Diablo 3, 11 years, but that was kind of like development hell. Earthbound, or Mother 3, took 12 years to develop. That's kind of the outlier here because that was prior to 10 years ago. Duke Nukem Forever, which was like that latest Duke Nukem game, took 15 years. That was also a development hell story. Metroid Dread is number 1 on this list, and it took 16 years to develop.
Wow. Jeez. I mean, and think about like that game also, like even by the standards I'm looking at, like if you look at the Metroid 2D franchise, you've got just like, it was like boom, 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 then boom, boom, right? Like, where the games came out. So yeah, that's a good one. And even if you're not looking at that, like that paradigm, just look at like the Diablo franchise, right? If you want to look at this in a more like normal, those are like extreme examples of games, and many of those were sort of like exceptional because they were stuck in development hell. When you're just looking at like a healthy development cycle, like look at Diablo, like how long it took Diablo 1 versus 2 to come out, right? That was like a 2-year development cycle, 3 years, I think, maybe. And then granted, there was a development hell, a hiatus from that entire franchise for about 10 years. But then you look at now look at 3 to 4, right? But Diablo 3 came out in 2012, and it's 2022 and we still don't have a release date on Diablo 4, and that is supposed to come out next year, but like, again, still no set release date, so it could get delayed again. So like, that's almost 10 years of just like, they've been in active development on Diablo 4 since Diablo 3's last expansion ended, and yet still like it got delayed. So that's an extreme example. Blizzard's always been a bit development helly, right? Like, think about like the StarCraft franchise and work. I mean, yeah, that entire studio has had its fair share of long development cycles. But then like, compared to like the 3D Zelda games, right? If you look at the era of like Ocarina of Time through, and Majora's Mask, granted, that one came out like 2 years after Ocarina of Time because they were using the same assets. But then like, again, even though, then just compare that to like a different engine, presumably
Wind
Waker, and it was still like the game came out like 3 years after. Was it 4? After
4 years, yep. Ocarina of Time was 98 and Wind Waker was 2002.
Sure, but then, you think about Majora's Mask was developed.
Yeah, so that was 2
so,
2 years.
So then, right, and then you got Twilight Princess. It was a little bit longer. 4 years, exactly.
Yeah.
Then Twilight Princess to Skyward Sword, I think
5
was
years.
6. Was it 5? Yeah, okay, so 5. You see it getting longer.
Yeah.
Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild.
6 years.
6 years, and then Breath of the Wild to Breath of the Wild 2. That's a 6-year gap too, since it's been officially delayed. So again, that's clearly longer, elongated. And then I last example I have is God of War. Again, not comparing 3 to like between 3 and 4, because that franchise went on sort of active, like, or went sort of, intentionally went dark to give time between those. I don't think they started 4 right after they finished 3. I think they worked on something else. So, but if you look at like 1 through 3, they came out within the same like 6-year period, I think. And then it's about to take, I think it was like what, 3 came out in 2018. So we're looking at a 4-year development cycle. And then, and this is even, again, this is even the cited reason why God of War 5 or God of War Ragnarok is ending its Norse story arc. Like, it's going to hit a story arc point instead of doing a trilogy. The cited reason was because the development cycle is getting longer. And Cory Barlog says, I want this franchise I want this story arc to be done by the time my kids graduate college. And I'm like, so the cited reason is this long development cycle. So I'm sure, like, I mean, give us more. We'll Google them. I guarantee you this research is not terribly hard to do, but you can just see how these like popular franchises, the only ones that don't have long development cycles are the ones with like yearly installments. And in those cases, they're just like reusing the same assets.
Great segue, because I wanted to talk about another aspect of development costs going up and budgets going up and franchises still being annual. Call of Duty. You think, oh, Activision's got this on lockdown. Development costs and studio, like, they're not taking longer. They come out with a game every year. No, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different entire companies, 9 studios that consist of hundreds of employees that are all working on Call of Duty stuff all at once. And it's a different side. So instead of taking the time, if you take Guerrilla Games, who make Killzone and Horizon, that's very serial. That's one company, one studio making one game at a time. Naughty Dog, same deal. Like one at a time. Like, they can only work on one game at a time. And Naughty Dog's gotten to the point where they're kind of starting to work in parallel, but that's a different story. Activision, being a publisher that's as rich as it is, has established 9 development studios all working in tandem to make sure you get a Call of Duty game every single year. Now, that's all thrown a wrench into everything with Microsoft acquiring them and whatnot. But
and these games aren't even, like, it comes at the cost of these games aren't even that different from one another, right? Like, they're all just sort of like minor incremental increases each year, as opposed to, a game like God of War, which like reimagined itself from the ground up.
Yeah.
I think too of like one of the, I won't say immune, but one of the developers that does seem somewhat resistant to this, because I was looking at it, like, you look at From Software, right? Like, they've done a pretty good job of putting stuff consistently out. Like, they're even experiencing the elongation, but it's much, much smaller, right? If you look at like Demon Souls to Dark Souls was like 2 years, Dark Souls 2 was like 3 years, and then Bloodborne came out 1 year after that, and then Dark Souls 3 came out like 2 years after that, Sekiro 2 years, and then Elden Ring like 3 years, I think, between Sekiro and Elden Ring. So like, they're doing pretty good, but you're still seeing elongation, and they too are getting big enough to work in parallel, because they mentioned that both Elden Ring and Sekiro were being worked on at the same time, and they're also have already been in parallel working on Armored Core. So and that's a franchise or a developer that seems to not be dipping in quality as a result of that. So they got something going on, but you also see they're not also like pushing the boundaries of their own engine, right? Like they're also still working off the same engine they've been working off of, and their like graphical fidelity is incremental at best in regards to the way they're, and they've also had like long-standing bugs and exploits within their system. So it's like they're not really, I mean, they are improving things gameplay wise, but they're not really improving the tools they're using to make it. So therefore they're kind of also taking these shortcuts. So it's like it almost comes at a cost, right? It's like you either get the games out frequently or you get the games out not frequently, but they tend to be bigger jumps and like, I'm not going to say more quality products because that's a fairly relative term, but like, you know, they tend to have less sort of long, you know, again, if they take the time to really work from the ground up, then it's going to like have less of the same kind of carryover of issues and possibly full reimaginings. So let's talk then about like, what are some of these reasons? Why is this happening? Why are these cycles getting longer? And then we'll circle back around to different things, that different strategies they use to reduce these. But yeah, so why is it happening? I think the easy answer here is like a mixture between cost and technology, right? Like those two things go hand in hand, obviously. But like the fact is, and I think again, this is sort of the cited reason of Cory Barlog, was he's like, these games just take so long to render nowadays, right? Like it was one thing when you could just like slap 3 pixels together and like have a character, right? Boom, like Pac-Man, boom, right? Like you just like it's like it takes no time at all.
The prolificacy, is that a word? The prolific nature,
prolification. I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah,
of like the indie games, right? They're small, like 16-bit looking stuff that require like nowhere near as much voice acting and animation work to do some sprite animation versus like a fully animated 3D model,
like Naughty Dog, where it's like, oh, you have like camera angles, and then you have to make sure that the change in camera angles doesn't completely mess up the model and the way the light hits it, and just like rendering takes so much time, effort, and we, the consumer, keep sort of like contributing to that, right? Because we keep saying, oh, you need to keep pushing the boundaries, and oh, it needs to look better and better and better.
The success of the big budget games that take forever to develop is kind of pushing. It's like a self-fulfilling, self-licking popsicle. It's like
self-licking popsicle.
Like Ghost of Tsushima was amazing, and because of why, all the things that contributed to the development cycle that Sucker Punch has had undergone through making Ghost of Tsushima is like the sequel or whatever they're working on next. It's going to feed that. Death Stranding, Horizon Forbidden West,
what is it called? Like victims of your own success. It's victims of their own success, right?
These
but
games
it's like an entire industry
so successful, and so
the industry is
Sony,
a victim of its own success. Yeah,
it is.
Exactly. And there's no stopping it, right? There's no stopping that train, because I saw a. Well, we'll circle back to that. I guess that's related more to our last question, but so it's rendering is one thing, and then of course, especially for a long time, we're seeing a change in this, but for a long time too, it's like there was this sort of like connection of like during like the Skyrim years, it was like, oh, games have to be long in order to be good. So like, we wanted the 100-hour, 200-hour games. Again, consumers wanted that.
Quote,
it seemed like that's where the industry was going. And so to make games that long, you either have to like, again, take shortcuts with the content, or you have to just bloat it and chock it full. And that takes a long time. You know, if it takes a long time to play, it's going to take even longer time to make it, to develop. Exactly. So
and we're
for every
seeing,
like hour
Ubisoft.
of gameplay, you're seeing like a month of work, right? If not more than that. So.
Yeah, you have the trend for like open world has also contributed to the development cycles, because like everyone's chasing that gold mine. And it's interesting that we had both Horizon Forbidden West and Breath of the Wild both released in 2017 on the heels of games like Skyrim and Assassin's Creed that were doing the more like open world light exploration. Like, so now open world. Just the word open world implies major development costs, like crazy testing.
Oh, yeah, because you can obfuscate
a
lot. You can obfuscate a lot in a linear game. But having something where you can literally
go wherever you want,
overturn every rock, right? Like that's a big deal. I also think of things like, so there's another sort of major event that also sort of, again, this may be exceptional, but it contributed to a lot of development, even further delays, but obviously COVID, right? And that happening caused a lot of recent elongation that may not have otherwise been present. But unfortunately, because of that now too, there's even longer, right? Like it's like now there's even more delays, because it's like the whole works, this already like very, very fragile machine of video game development then got delayed. And then at around the same time, slightly before that, there were all those exposés on crunch and crunch culture. And so the changes that have come about that are actually really good for developers and for the product quality that we're getting, the side effect is it's going to take longer for games to come out now because like they're trying to slow the developers down, which slows for their own well-being, but that slows development down. So again, they either have to hire more or they have to change the way the things are managed. Now, ideally, this comes with management changes because management is often the problem, right? It's not just development that's the problem, it's management. But there are certain limitations on development that need to be that will be affected if there's if there's good quality reasonable changes to the industry that need to come as a result of that. So it's like a lot of like events kind of happen at once that also is contributing to this, but it was happening anyways, right? It was happening anyways. It was going to happen anyways. So,
and I'm curious, this is kind of a speculative answer about why development budgets and why it's longer. I wonder what Sony's existence, just period, the end of the PlayStation 3 era was when like Killzone 3, Resistance 3, Infamous 1 and 2, like these big first party hits from Sucker Punch, from Insomniac, were hitting the market in Guerrilla Games, and then into the PlayStation 4 where they really hit their stride with big titles. And we saw the end of like the epitome of those things being Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding. And we still continue to see that now with even smaller titles like Returnal, and how Housemarque was making these cool little fun arcadey style games that took 1 or 2 years to make, and then there's a huge gap to make Returnal, which Sony is just putting tons of money into these studios, but it's changing the expectation of the consumer so much so that Microsoft in this generation has changed their tactic and started acquiring studios and now has a slate of games.
Think of like Hellblade 2. Yeah, Hellblade 2
Hellblade 2 is one of those games now.
Title, and like where's it's not even out yet. Exactly.
Right?
Like where's
Halo
it?
Infinite was delayed. Redfall was delayed, but it's coming soon, and we have a
So you're saying you're like
Fable
speculating that like there was a big change. Well, I think too about like there was definitely like a push for quality and sort of releasing products when they were ready. Like that was even present even as it's like it's sad to say it's like the Blizzard that was
Blizzard.
like that used to be their thing, right? Like and you saw that happen with and you saw that happen in their development cycles on the WoW expansions, right? Like if you look at the WoW expansion releases, that all changed when Activision took over and then was like, nope, just like everything else, you have to make this a 2-year cycle, right? Pretty much. And so now they're on a 2-year cycle where every other year they release a WoW expansion and they suck now, right?
Yeah.
Coincidentally. I wonder why that
is. Activision. That's why.
But, previously in the past, though, like, I'm wondering if, like, again, it wasn't, I'm just saying it wasn't just Sony. There were other developers, too, that were like, no, we take our time, we put out a quality product, and they were known for that, and they were, like, respected, and
but Sony brought that mainstream. Like, Sony took what was a minority of good studios
in the console space, in particular.
Exactly,
exactly.
Yeah, and now they're bringing those games to PC, so they're, like, pushing that boundary. But and Microsoft's reaction with Game Pass and all those things, we have their list of huge amounts of studios. We got the new Fable and the new Perfect Dark reboot and Avowed,
and Outer Worlds,
like,
Outer Worlds 2,
Outer Worlds 2, and like all this stuff. Nothing's materialized because Microsoft reacted to Sony, and is now all those games are now stuck in a longer development style. Like they're behind exactly.
But
I don't know.
They're behind on development cycles that are even getting longer. No, I see that for sure. So,
So again, it's a speculative answer because like Sony strategized and started executing on that strategy in like the early 2000s, like mid 2000s, and we're now seeing the fruition of that like 17 years later from 2005. Right.
And so Microsoft starts doing that in like 2015, and now it's only 5 years later. Yeah, exactly. So cool. All right. Well, so is there anything, whether they be tools or practices, that you think might reduce the development cycle, and do you foresee changes that will make these shorter again? I'll jump in and say it looks like really promising what Unreal 5 is able to help with, right? So engines are the first answer, right? Like those are the tools. Increasing the efficiencies of the tools that they use to make games will reduce the development cycle, specifically in regards to utilizing technologies, whether it be, again, either something like built into the engine, like the whole like triangle thing that Unreal 5 has, or even technology such as AI that will help like increase the ability to render things faster, right? Because that's the problem. We expect all these realistic renderings, but that stuff takes forever to design and to develop and to render. The art people, the art teams are just completely backed up with work. And that holds everything else up, right? Like all the release, everything is like it's tied to making the game look as good as it possibly can with no bugs. Sure, does it need to work? And are there like, I'm not trying to minimize the work that like animation and the programming and blah, 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 blah. But it's like at the end of the day, the thing that you consume the most and interact the most with is the graphics of the game. And so those artists have just an unreasonable amount of work they have to do.
Yep.
So tools that make that better are going to obviously reduce. And so I'm really excited about what Unreal 5 showed off. I want you to also now talk about that too.
Yeah,
or anything.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I do want to talk about like cloud infrastructure on the development side. So it's one thing for us as consumers to buy a new cell phone and like, okay, all of our stuff's on the cloud. So you buy a new phone and you get all your contacts and all your files and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But on the development side, like having assets in the cloud, being able to work collaboratively and people working from home, and it removes the serialness of it where one thing predicates another. It's now like everything's in the cloud and it can pull from the cloud and render things from the cloud. It significantly reduces development cycles. We have lots of development tools like continuing automation, configuration management, like all this stuff out there, things like containerization,
all the
Docker.
All the things in my work. It's almost like I should work in the video game industry now.
Yeah, right? But exactly. Like those things help developers get their stuff together and collaborate faster and more efficiently. So in addition to things like Unreal 5 that will help with automation of lighting and physics rendering, which is insane already, the developers can focus on the stuff that makes their game unique. And a perfect example in a zooming in super low level is the Decima engine. Guerrilla made this for Horizon Zero Dawn. It came out in 2017. 2.5 years later, Death Stranding came out, which means Kojima, an entirely different studio, made a brand new video game from the ground up, filled it with content, animations, voice acting, models, and a whole new world using the same engine in just 2.5 years, which is a ridiculously fast development cycle. Now, granted, that game doesn't have a lot of content because most of what you're doing in the game doesn't involve a lot of AI. It's like you don't have a lot of content, but like
so fun.
Yeah, it's awesome.
No,
and
you know,
see, like
aside from the full blown movie that's in the game once you beat it.
yeah, exactly. But that's an example of a shortened development cycle by sharing an engine. So you think that's Decima, that's Sony exclusive, and that's between two different studios. But Unreal 5 is unleashed to everyone, the masses. You and I could get into it, making an Unreal 5 game. So being able to like have all of the assets at your fingertips to just develop stuff like super.
We haven't seen the fruits
level.
of that yet. We haven't really seen games come out yet because Unreal 5 was just like formally released. Now I don't know how many developers may or may not get their hands on Unreal 5, but like again, also fewer and fewer big developers are actually using Unreal anymore because it costs so much. So they got their own in-house stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see what the fruits of Unreal 5 end up being. Yeah. But in addition to tools, there's also practices, right? And I was hinting at this earlier, like management, the idea that like people who don't make these things set the timelines, like that kind of practice needs to stop. Like they need to let the developers be like the ones who run that. Number one, because it reduces the stress, of course, right? We don't have to try to like shoot for a date. It's like we're already seeing delays. Like we the consumers have gotten used to the delays. So like let the developers like do their work at their pace. And you know, that may be sounding counterintuitive in the sense that like, no, that will just increase the development time. It may in some cases, but the reality too is that like when it speaks to a sort of toxic management involvement that like if you would actually remove that, you'd actually see greater efficiencies across the board because like, and I think there's no better example of this than Cyberpunk 2077, right? You had, and this wasn't even like a publisher like demanding, this was like their top management being like, we have to do this and get it out. And it's like, no, the irony is Cyberpunk 2077 itself may have come out a year later, but we also would have gotten the DLC and stuff like that a lot sooner because they wouldn't have had to spend 2.5 years just fixing the freaking game like they have, right? Like, so that's the thing is like, sure, great, awesome, get the game out and then spend forever fixing it when you could be developing new content. Think of all those developers that could be put towards The Witcher 4, right? Like it's like these management practices and these management like involvement where they shouldn't be involved is crushing the video game industry, because like they're just creating more problems that then need to go back and be fixed, and that delays everything. So like managers need to, the people who aren't making the product need to back off from the actual development of the product. Like that just needs to stop. So there's my rant, right? Like, because you can't.
The flip side of that argument is like, if you and I are both publishers and we're looking at revenue and income coming in, like when our game releases, that's cashing in an investment.
Of course,
so you put up a whole bunch of money up front. So that's what drives like the calendar as far as development cycles are concerned from a business perspective, completely devoid of any of the actual people hands on the keyboard. You know, that's where unionization comes in to like make sure worker life balance is like quality and make sure the content is quality to make sure when a game does release that it actually makes money. And so the change in our industry, at least from a publisher perspective, is that there's a longer timeline between big releases. But what ends up happening is that they're higher quality. I think it's a different conversation than it is. What we're trying to highlight here, where games are just
you're right,
becoming
there
bigger.
There are developers who just like, were they left to their own devices, they would also just never come out with anything, right? I think of Anthem, right? Like BioWare just screwed the pooch on that. And then it actually did take like publisher involvement to get something out of the gate. And again, similarly, had they not gotten themselves involved, then Anthem potentially never would have released, and therefore, by the Dragon Age 4 and the next Mass Effect game, they would have gotten delayed further. But those exceptions, I feel like, those are almost exceptions that prove the rules, right? Like where it's like those are like usually so rare. Usually it's the opposite, right? Where the publisher is involving themselves way too much. And but so like that's why I appreciate like Sony, right? Like Sony is just like, and Nintendo too. They're like, we'll put it out when it's done and quality, and that's more important to us.
Seems like Microsoft is doing that with their acquisitions
now. Oh, definitely, yes.
Especially with the conversation I just had with the CFO of ZeniMax that Microsoft acquired, which is like id Software, Machine Games, Bethesda, et cetera, those studios. Microsoft's having a very hands-off. We're in control. Microsoft's basically coming in saying, we're in control now, so do your thing. We're hands off, be your culture, be your studio, get your stuff done. And we're seeing that in Microsoft's world with the lack of releases. And that's the number one complaint about Game Pass is where the first party big games. Stuff's getting delayed, but Microsoft's doing it right. Like, we're going to let the studios do what they got to do. We're not going to,
to do it right.
They're not pushing their like publisher. And so that also leads to a longer development cycle for now. Maybe that will accelerate as they optimize themselves without the publisher influence, without the
only
driving,
Microsoft
whipping.
had access to a massive cloud.
They're using that, homie. Leverage. You know they are.
I know. They're using average. That's really crazy. Yeah.
Right?
All right, cool. So I want to end here, though. No, my last question here is related to, and I was hinting at this earlier, and now I'll circle back around to it. There's an article I saw a while ago where I think it was Jeff Grubb from Giant Bomb, formerly was it GameSpot or IGN? I don't know. One of the big. He was formerly of that, but now he's with Giant Bomb. I think he had said, and so if it wasn't Jeff Grubb, then I apologize. But it was one of those big guys in the gaming industry. He had proposed this notion of like, oh, maybe we should just reduce, like, they should reduce the quality, right? Like reduce the graphical fidelity. We as consumers are okay. We play tons of indie games that look like crap, right? Elden Ring objectively looks worse than the Demon's Souls remake, and yet it's going to far exceed the quality because they didn't care so much about the graphical fidelity. So he's basically saying, like, developers should focus more on like putting out quality games that maybe don't look as good. If that will reduce the development cycles, then it's worth it, and we will appreciate it as consumers. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think developers should do that? Right. That's my kind of last question I want to end on.
That's a great question because we know like the return on investment with higher powered hardware and like better like the iterations are getting smaller and smaller. It's like the difference between PS2 and PS3 was huge, and then like PS3 to PS4 was big. PS4 to PS5 is like okay, like
it's noticeable, but noticeable, but not like game breaking. Yep, exactly.
And like the actual graphics don't look that much better, but the frame rates are better, so we're seeing better animation, which is kind of a big deal. But so in that conversation is why not reduce the amount of money and budget, like putting into these high-powered rendered CGI things, and like don't put as much money and time and effort into those tiny details of that. Reduce it a little bit and get games out more often. and not sacrifice voice acting, not sacrifice plot, storytelling, and those things, and change the art style that doesn't require as much,
And I definitely think that there's certain games
Hollywood
that could
studios.
absolutely benefit from that, right? Like God of War didn't need to look as amazing. Like God of War was a good enough game where it didn't need to look as amazing as it did to do as well as it did. And hell, if we could have gotten 3 amazing games out of it instead of 2, if they had just backed off of that, I think it would have been worth it in the long term. However, my counter argument to that statement is, or my counter argument to that notion is, the existence of a problem means that as human beings, we've always taken problems and turned the solutions into advancement, right? Like progress, right? So we're faced, the industry is faced with this problem. Development cycles are getting longer. It's taking longer to make games and complete visions, especially when you have multiple entry franchises where it's planned from the beginning to be, Final Fantasy Remake, 3 entries, like we need to get these out. The solutions to those problems end up becoming like better technology, right? Like we get things out of it. We get better product, not just the product, the end product, but the tools used to make that product almost always then have better, bigger, greater applications. So I say that, like, it's like, I don't know. And it's such a hard thing to answer because on the one hand, I see both arguments, right? I see both sides, but I think where I would land is like, no, we just need better tools, right? Like if they can find ways to make the process smoother, and then the things like you were talking about, like Unreal 5, cloud, AI, like all these tools that we're now using to try to answer this problem, like those will have applications even beyond the gaming industry itself that will allow so many artists and so many creators to make more things. In the case of AI, it may result in the end of mankind, but like, whatever. Like, I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. Did you hear about that, like, Google article where that dude got fired because he's like, this became self-aware? I'm like, all right, it's over. We're done. It's self-aware now.
The
so
humanity is at stake.
Let's hope the robots make really good games and then just like hook us up into the Matrix where you can play games all the time. Like I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Let's make it happen, right? Yeah, let's make it happen.
The Matrix 1. Remember the steak tastes so good. I'm happy here. The steak is amazing.
I'm Cypher, right? I'm willing to be Cypher in this case. Yeah,
me too. I love it. Well, you're right though, because like things that used to take back when like Half-Life 1 and Quake 1 were developed were like shadow mapping. We had an episode where we talked about those types of things where lighting and shadows are very natural, and there's an automated way to just render those things. And now we're into ray tracing and like what reflections look like. And I feel like AI and cloud computing can just handle that. Like there should be a service where like if I'm drawing a game and I'm making a world, the way the sun shines down, or 2 suns, if I want to get sci-fi with it, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever the lighting is, it's going to behave the way light should behave. It's kind of objective. Unless I really want to get in there and tweak it, there should be like a generalized off, like I just throw that into the service and I have free shadows, free ray tracing, free lighting, and I don't have to do anything with that. I just get it. And I feel like Unreal 5 is a step in that direction. And so we're still going to see like ridiculously high fidelity graphics and CGI, computer generated information.
Yep.
Like rendered at a much faster pace. So we're going to, that's where Jeff Grubb kind of falls short on his own statement. We're like, we could reduce the graphical fidelity, but we don't have to, because it's the same. You just push this button and you get this thing for free.
Sure. Right. And the answer, like I said, the answer is like, and if we can make sure we do AI right, and AI in the narrow range that we've been using it, like there are software solutions to these problems too, right? Where it's like, there are programs that we could easily make now. Easily, I say easily. I don't know how to make any of these things, so I can't. Right? Yeah, we could easily make. It's within the realm of possibility now, where we could have a sort of AI powered application that like goes in and like does the initial rendering of things, and then the artist then comes in and cleans it up, right? Or goes in and does like helps with the initial programming, or or could go in and maybe even reduce the testing, right? Like an AI tester, I feel like.
Yeah, automated testing
or application automate, right? Where it's like, it goes in and just like and smooths out that entire thing where it catches issues before the testers do, and then you have a human tester go in there and just verify it, right? Like that kind of thing could be huge in reducing these things. And it's like, and we won't if we just reduce the problem by saying, okay, well we'll just like lower the quality of everything, then we're, potentially robbing the industry. I say we again, I'm not in the industry, but the industry could be robbing itself of opportunities to push the boundaries of what's possible. And I think
there's a spot for both. There's a spot for an amazing game that doesn't push boundaries, and there's a spot for an amazing game that does push boundaries.
I agree.
And each of those are going to have different budgets from different teams, and they're going to do their thing, and we need them both to be healthy.
I agree.
And
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is then the elongation of the development cycle. We've hinted at this topic before many times on the podcast, but never really tackled it as a full-blown topic. So I'm glad we did, because I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like I hope everyone did. So we want to hear your thoughts, people. Do you think development cycles are too long? Do you think development cycles are not long enough, and these crap games keep getting pushed out, and they should have taken more time on it? We want to hear all those thoughts and more. Termite, where can the good listeners of the podcast share their thoughts if they have them?
Tell us where you think the next Donkey Kong Returns game is coming from. If it's not Retro Studios, over at 80BIT Podsmash, 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing website with links to all of our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, and our Discord server, where you can strike up a conversation, you can comment on a post, you can react to anything you hear on this show. We have a weekly show that drops every Monday at midnight. We are 253, that's this episode. Episodes long in length, and many more on the way. We've been operating for almost 5 years. So come join our community, join our conversations, give us your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, and ideas. And you can check us out if you are coming by way of YouTube, where our audio files drop, and you want to know where you can get your podcast, go to 80bitpodsmash.com. There's links to Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, as well as our RSS feed that you can throw into any third-party app and put us where you are. And if not, let us know, and we'll put us where you want us to be. And you can get us every week. So,
all right, next week we are plugging away, continuing at our Soul in the Console, just ramming ourselves through those Nintendo handhelds, and we are talking, so we're doing our Soul in the Console on Nintendo DS, not 3DS. 3DS will be a separate episode, so just the DS line. We're talking about next week. So, and we're about to record that in 5 minutes. So we will see you then.
See you next week.